Ecosystem ecology encompasses organismal, population, and community ecology, also known as the biotic components, with the abiotic or non living components in a geographic area. Abiotic components are classified either as resources such as oxygen, amount of nitrogen in soils, and water availability, and parameters such as temperature, elevation, and water pH. Resources are abiotic components that organisms need to carry out life processes, while parameters dictate the types of species that live in a given area. For example, prairies are characterized by moderate rainfall, nutrient rich soils, and temperate environments, meaning that the area has seasons. Due to these resources and parameters, few trees grow here, but the nutrient rich soil and moderate rainfall allow for grasses to grow in abundance. Likewise, the animals that live here generally act as grazers of these grasses or burrow into the soil. Even birds like this burrowing owl nestle into holes in the ground as they sleep during the day. Overall, an ecosystem is a community of all living organisms and their biotic components. They can range from large biomes like a boreal forest of Alaska, Canada, Russia, and Northern Europe to as small as your own guts, which support hundreds of microorganisms. Ecosystems can be broadly defined by three types, but please note that thousands of different ecosystems exist on Earth, all with their own unique form of biodiversity. The three broad ecosystem types are freshwater ecosystems, which are the least common of the three, making only 1.8% of the Earth's surface. These include rivers, streams, creeks, lakes, ponds, wetlands, swamps, and springs. Next is marine ecosystems, which take up to 75% of the Earth's surface and include intertidal zones, shallow oceans, open ocean, and the bottom of the ocean. Shallow oceans are some of the most diverse places on the planet. And the last major ecosystem is a terrestrial ecosystem, which are found on land and take up a little over 23% of Earth's surface. These are also known as biomes. These are large geographic areas with similar climate and dominant plant life. And while many biologists classify terrestrial ecosystems into 8 biomes, there is so much diversity of ecosystems within each of these biomes. For example, the biome of the Pacific Northwest is called a temperate forest. Kentucky, my home state, is also in a temperate forest biome, but the ecosystems differ vastly. And this is because Kentucky is classified more specifically as a temperate deciduous forest, as it experiences seasons, and the majority of those trees lose their leaves each fall. And the Pacific Northwest is considered a temperate coniferous forest biome, whereby the majority of the trees are cone-bearing plants with needle-like leaves that do not shed during the fall. However, when you go to the southeastern United States, you also reach a temperate coniferous forest, but with a longer growing season and more heat and humidity. Let's be honest, mid-July in Alabama is miserable. The point is, even biomes have microbiomes within them. Let's move on to one of the main functions of the ecosystems, the transfer of nutrients and energy. I guess I should start by asking, why do we need food? Food provides three things: an energy source to fuel the organism, nutrients to build biological materials such as proteins and DNA, and chemicals used to carry out biological processes like sodium and potassium for nerve impulses, and calcium to begin muscle contractions. With the exception of some ecosystems that utilize chemical energy and minerals, most ecosystems rely on the process of photosynthesis, which all starts with the sun. You will notice three different colored arrows in this diagram. Red represents energy transferred between groups, blue is nutrient transferred between groups, finally, yellow represents entropy or lost usable energy. If you recall, with each energy transfer, there is a loss of usable energy. When the sun shines on, producers, or organisms that undergo photosynthesis, take that energy from sunlight and convert it into food molecules like glucose and starch. In addition, producers will collect inorganic molecules from their surrounding environment. Note that most of the energy provided by the sun is lost as entropy in space, and likewise, producers must utilize energy to survive, which is also lost as entropy. This makes energy less available before producers are either eaten by consumers or they end up decomposing. Consumers get their nutrients and energy by eating other producers or consumers. Consumers can never receive the full amount of energy from their food because of entropy, and so they make up for it by eating more. Also, because consumers use energy, entropy occurs. Decomposers retrieve energy and nutrients by decomposing dead or decaying producers and consumers. And like consumers, they also utilize energy, leading to more entropy. However, decomposers recycle nutrients stored in dead organisms back into the environment, which are made available again to plants. Nutrients are recycled on Earth, but energy works in a single direction. However, as long as the sun shines, we'll be fine. But one day, the sun will no longer function. But hopefully, our species, or whatever we evolve into, will be spacefaring by then. I hope. Oh well, this is not going to happen to in our lifetime or our grandkids, so don't worry about it. Ecologists utilize food chains as a model to understand nutrients and energy transfer between organisms. A food chain is a linear sequence of organisms through which nutrients and energy pass from one organism to another. I chose organisms in a prairie food chain with prairie sunflowers acting as a producer, which makes food molecules from sunlight and stores that food in seeds, leaves, and other plant tissue. Least chipmunks are primary consumers or herbivores in that they eat producers. In this case, the chipmunk will eat those sunflower seeds, retrieving both nutrients and energy from the sunflower, but it will not receive as much energy as the sunflower did from the sun, so the chipmunk eats more to compensate. Prairie rattlesnakes are secondary consumers or carnivores in that they eat primary consumers. And like the chipmunk, the snake receives energy and nutrients from that chipmunk, but not the same energy level as the chipmunk got from the sunflower, so the snake has to eat more to compensate. Finally, the Swainson's hawk, a tertiary consumer, is a top carnivore that eats carnivores. Although it eats the snake and gets nutrients, the energy level received is not as high as the snake got, so the hawk has to eat even more. Because of this loss of energy with each trophic level, each ecosystem can only support so many producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers. And this forms an ecological pyramid where the vast majority of the biomass in an ecosystem are producers, which support a smaller group of primary consumers, and in turn support an even smaller group of secondary consumers, and very few tertiary consumers at the top. Food chains are useful when following the pathway of energy and nutrients at a micro level, but organisms are complex and even occupy different trophic levels. For example, omnivores like bears can occupy either primary, secondary, and even tertiary levels of the food chain. Therefore, a food web is a much more accurate and descriptive model of energy and nutrient transfer in ecosystems. Food webs show both the many organisms a predator may feed on, and likewise the many secondary predators that may feed on it.
Note that phytoplankton and vegetation act as primary producers, by which benthic invertebrates and waterfowl depend upon them as primary consumers.
Not only do you see the many different trophic positions each organism occupies, but you also see the importance of interconnectivity.
For example, if the bivalves were removed from this food web, it would be one less food source for sea ducks and tundra swans, leading to more competition between these birds. Likewise, there is one less primary consumer, keeping the phytoplankton population in check.
The energy acquired in ecosystems is used to build an energy molecule called ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. This molecule powers all functions in our cells, and the energy used to make ATP comes from the chemical bonds found in food, which ultimately were made by photosynthetic organisms, which got that energy from the sun. Organisms that make food molecules like glucose and starch from sunlight are classified as autotrophs and include plants, algae, and photosynthetic bacteria. Organisms that rely on photosynthetic organisms are called heterotrophs and include animals, many bacteria, protozoans, and fungi. Energy productivity in an ecosystem can be measured in two ways. Gross primary productivity incorporates all energy absorbed by sunlight via photosynthesis, and net primary productivity is the energy that remains in producers after accounting for their metabolism and heat loss, or entropy. This is the energy left over to support other life forms. One of the ways that people affect food chains and food webs, besides depleting organisms around the chain, is biomagnification. Biomagnification is the increasing concentration of persistent toxic substances in organisms at each trophic level. The first major case of biomagnification came in the 1960s when biologist Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring, which displayed the determinants of the pesticide DDT. DDT pesticides would run off into water and be taken up by plankton, which were then eaten by primary and secondary consumers. Each time a transfer occurred between trophic levels, DDT levels increased greatly in the tissues of the next organism. And this is because the higher up you are on the food chain, the more you need to eat, giving you more DDT in this case. Rachel Carson observed that the raptors exposed to DDT produced eggs with really soft shells to the point that offspring couldn't survive. And this almost led to the extinction of the bald eagle. In 1970, DDT was banned in most countries worldwide, and today the bald eagle is no longer on the endangered species list. So now that we know about the transfer of energy and nutrients, where do these specific nutrients come from? See, all nutrients are made mostly from 6 commonly found elements on Earth. In our next video, we will explore the importance of how these elements are acquired by living things and ecosystems.